to Hilarious Homeschooling, 6-month countdown, getting ready to homeschool. We are more than halfway, so congratulations. Thanks for sticking with it. Today, we're going to be talking about Wisdom's Way of Learning. I have this ready to download on my blog, hilarioushomeschooling.com. It's week 14. We're going to be talking about Wisdom's Way of Learning. But before I tell you about her book, I wanted to talk a little bit about our family and what I was going through during this time. I put a picture of our family in there in the spring of 2011. That was 12 years ago now. And there was a lot going on. I'm smiling in the picture, but my life had been, I'd gone through a few hard years. My dad died in December of 2009. And I delivered a stillborn son, Justin, in October of 2010. I was struggling to stay afloat and to keep up with all that was required of me as a mom. I just think that there's certain seasons of life that are hard, and having 6 young kids is hard. But I think that going through grief and unexpected grief, no less, there's a different kind of pain it's underneath everything. And so those days weren't very easy. And I didn't necessarily feel like I was drowning, but I felt overwhelmed all the time. This is the point in my life where God brought in this book, this message of Wisdom's Way of Learning by Marilyn Howshall. And I remember reading the book over the summer and thinking, okay, I want to try this. It was a much different approach to learning than I'd ever seen before. But what she was saying made sense, and it brought me a new measure of, I don't want to say survival, because I was already surviving, but this idea that we could thrive in a more unstructured environment than we were used to, and that I didn't have to be afraid of it. And that was really, really, really helpful for me that day, that year, that summer. And so I tried it. That year would have been the next year that we were doing this, 2012, 2013. Nathan was in 8th grade and Amelia was in 7th grade. They were involved in something that our church calls Bible instruction. And it's a very intense class for junior high students, kind of similar to some churches' confirmation class, where they were learning Old Testament history, New Testament history, doctrines of the Christian faith, and how to live, application, everyday life. And it was 1-year class, lots of Bible memory, extra effort was put forth in all of that. So I knew that they were going to need some extra time out of their day to really do a good job with that class. And then I had also been reading about the Robinson method, which I haven't written down anywhere, but you can Google it if you want. The Robinson method is this idea that you just basically give your kids a reading list and every day require them to do 2 hours of reading, 1 hour of math in a predetermined curriculum, and write. I think Robinson has them writing for an hour. I changed it to just writing a page or half a page about what they'd read. That is how I did school 2012, 2013. Especially with Nathan and Amelia. They were independent enough to do that. They had their Bible instruction lessons to do every day. They had reading. They could read anything. I didn't care. 2 hours of reading, an hour of math, and a page of writing. It was freeing for me. We were not to the point necessarily of unschooling. I don't know that I ever could have gotten to the point of unschooling. But for me, it was the most free I'd ever been in planning out education. Elise was a 3rd grader and Joshua was a 1st grader. And I was able to give them more of my attention in developing their skills in math and reading and language arts. And then we had 2 preschoolers. Annika and Jessica were both not yet in school. So it was very, very busy. But that year, I just remember as kind of a breath of fresh air. And I will always be grateful to Marilyn Howshall for opening my eyes to this way of learning. The year after that, Nathan started at high school, and I knew I needed to keep track of what we were learning for his transcript. And so we did go back to a more structured form of education the next year. But for this season of life, for this stage that I was in, getting my feet back underneath me, just dealing with life and that busy of a household, it was really helpful to have this new way of learning. Okay, so basically the booklet that I had when I first read it was a very large, just paperback coil ring book that she had put together back in the 90s. And so that is one reason that it was hard for me to tell you to go find her ebooks, because not that necessarily the message has changed, she's kind of restructured it, but there's now 4 ebooks. And so it's not exactly the way that I remember it. I have reread them in the last 2 or 3 weeks just to kind of refresh my memory on what all she was saying. And it's interesting, once again, to see how much her writing influenced my philosophy and education over the past decade. So the things that she presented in the 4 ebooks were very similar to what I read, but not exactly the same book. And that's okay. The point of all the things that she's talking about is that you should be trusting God to lead you with your child. There is not a curriculum out there that is going to fit your child perfectly to a T, because your child is unique. Your child is given special gifts by God to be who he or she was created to be. There are curriculum out there that have helped other children in the past, but that doesn't mean that they will help your child. And so whenever you're looking at curriculum, you have to be skeptical. You have to be a little bit more discerning as a parent and say, this may or may not fit my child. And always use the curriculum as a tool, because you don't want the curriculum to boss you around. You want to boss the curriculum around. If it's not working for you and your child, don't keep being miserable. There's no need for that. In fact, Marilyn says you really don't need curriculum at all, because you can study the things that your child is most interested in. And what you're trying to do is teach them the process and the tools of how to learn for themselves, so that they're equipped to learn anything that they want to learn for the rest of their life. She does not believe in the fact that you need to be afraid of gaps in your child's education. Everybody everywhere is going to have gaps in their education. There are things that I don't know how to do. I cannot fix a lawnmower. I don't even know if I could change a tire, which is pretty scary. But God hasn't asked me to do any of those things. What I do need to be able to do is cook supper for our family and make sure that we have clean and mostly patched up clothes. The style now is to not have patched up clothes, so I let those go. But there's different gifts that God gives each of his children so that they can be equipped to do what he asks them to do. So you don't have to give your child a one-size-fits-all education. If your child is interested in butterflies, then you can spend a year learning about butterflies. Now, what Marilyn Haushaw is saying is that you actually teach them how to learn then using what they're interested in already. And so she has a whole, there's charts throughout the book that kind of give her ideas that there's 5 processes. They start with R's. They're record and reason and rhetoric, and I forget the other 2. But her point is, if you can teach them those processes on something that they already want to learn, then they are going to be able to use those processes over and over and over and over again, no matter how old they get, because education is not a thing that you ever finish. Your whole life should be full of learning, and you should be planning to learn for the rest of your life, not just after you finish your high school graduation, you're done learning. She doesn't believe in that. There is, I tell parents this, that sometimes you have to learn how to play the education game. We want all of our kids to love to learn. But if you're living in America, there is a point where if you want a higher degree in college, you're going to have to jump through somebody's hoops somewhere. And so in that case, you almost have to set aside your love of learning and just learn how your teacher wants you to fulfill expectations, to get the degree, to get the class, to get the credit, to get whatever certificate you need to get to move on in your job. It's not that you don't, I mean, it's not that you want to hate learning then, but your goal is no longer loving learning. Your goal is how to jump through these hoops that I have to do in order to satisfy the requirements to get the next step up. Okay, that's a whole different rabbit trail, and that's not necessarily something from Marilyn Howshall's book, because she would emphasize you probably don't need your kid to get a degree. You probably don't need your kid to graduate from high school. You just need to get them to love to learn, and then wherever their life takes them, they will be prepared for it. Okay, yes and no. I wanted my children to have a high school diploma. I want my children to be able to go on to college if that's something that they desire and that their career requires of them. So in that case, you kind of do have to jump through some hoops even during high school. But that's why it was really nice to experiment with her methods while Nathan was in 8th grade, because I didn't have to write a transcript for him for his 8th grade year. So that's one reason that year worked really well for experimenting with some of her ideas. The verse for today is from Joshua 3. Joshua 3, we'll start at verse 1 and go through verse 4. Early in the morning, Joshua and all the Israelites set out from Shittim and went to Jordan, where they camped before crossing over. After 3 days, the officers went throughout the camp, giving orders to the people. When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests who are Levites carrying it, you are to move out from your positions and follow it. Then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before. But keep a distance of about 1,000 yards between you and the ark. Do not go near it. I love this promise to Joshua that God is going to be the one to lead him, because Joshua's never been where he's going before. And in some ways, in your educational journey, you haven't ever been where you're going before. And God wants to be the one to lead you in this educational journey of homeschooling. So in some ways, you are on a journey with God, and he's going to show you which way to go, because you've never been this way before. That is a promise from God that you can trust in, that while God is leading you and you're leading your kids, you will get to the place where God wants you to be. Now, that also requires that you pay attention, to what God is calling you to do, because you are the one giving the directions to your children right now. They are trusting you as the representative of God. And so in some ways, this is a huge responsibility, because you're paying attention to God and you're paying attention to what your kids need and what God is showing you that your kids need. And it may not be a packaged curriculum anywhere. That's what Marilyn's saying, is that you don't need to go invest all of your money in what works for other people, because you can have what God says will work for your child right there in your home. So God has an individual plan for each child. You don't have to buy generic curriculum. You need to be willing to receive education yourself. God is going to be teaching you as you teach your kids. So you need to be teachable and humble. Her point is that all of life offers educational opportunities. So you are the one who are helping your kids develop their tools and their research skills for lifelong learning with what's already at hand and what already interests your child. So basically, you are just thinking about, what does your child want to learn about? What do they spend their time asking about? What do they seem to be an expert on? Some kids go through stages where they are experts on dinosaurs. Other kids, they're experts on Legos. Other kids are experts on Thomas the Tank Engine train, or they might have a collection of stuffed animals. Pay attention to what your child really wants to do and really wants to learn about, even if it doesn't seem academic. Because she's saying that you can teach your child academic processes using things that don't seem academic. I remember one of the things that my kids love to do is they had a whole bunch of stuffed animals, and they know all of their names, and they know all of like who's related to who in their stuffed animal families. And so there were times where they would just go to their room and they would get out all their stuffed animals and they would just start listing them on a piece of paper. Okay, well, right there you've got recording, collecting, naming, writing, listing, organizing. She's saying that if you can pay attention to your child's play, you're going to actually see redeeming value in it, that a lot of the academic assignments that people create or make up artificially, you can just cross them off of your curriculum or your need to try to teach that to them because they're already doing it. They're already doing it in what they care about and what they're playing every day. If you can just open your eyes and recognize it and count it in your brain or on a piece of paper as an academic activity. In this way, you can see that your child is using their skills for writing, penmanship, spelling. They probably won't do alphabetical order on their own, but just, why are they making the list in the order that they are? If you have a careful conversation with them where they don't even know what you're getting at, you can find out even more about what your children know about classifying or collecting or organizing or listing or recording. And those, she says, are the very first processes that anybody's going to do in a research project. Well, maybe they're not doing a research project in their mind, but in your mind, you can start to see the beginnings of academic processes and tools that they can use later on in life. So she says, in this case, instead of spending all of your money on curriculum that other people have put out that is artificial, look around at your real life and see if you can upgrade the quality of what you're doing in your home. Could you invest instead in a sewing machine and teach your kids how to sew if that's something that's interesting to them? Could you invest in wood carving tools or woodworking tools, microscopes, musical instruments? What are some things that could make your whole entire home a little bit more enriching? And can you afford the quality materials that you would need to be able to do a better job of teaching or leading or kind of interesting your kids into those kind of things so that your lifestyle becomes more enriching all around, even if it's not during the academic days of times of the day. View education as a series of seasons. Don't rush your kids through their seasons. She's very big on, look at the processes and let them develop them at their own rate. Sometimes we as parents get so impatient and we're so worried that they're not going to be acquiring all the knowledge and skills of their peers. And so we get nervous and we start pushing things on them that have no relevance to their life. And that is how students end up getting burnt out, turned off. Their love of learning goes away because to them, what you're calling learning doesn't have anything to do with what they're interested in. And so we're actually doing our kids a disservice by force feeding them curriculum that they have no interest in, just to make ourselves feel better that we're actually teaching them something. She says not to fall for that. That's very difficult for me. I have a degree in elementary education. And so I went through, all 4 years of college learning how to teach using curriculum and how to rely on the curriculum to help you get the product that you want. But the problem is that our kids aren't products. They're people. They're persons that have been created by God. And the Holy Spirit is leading them towards something that they're going to do in their life. And so we need to be careful to honor that and not dull their minds with things that have nothing to do with what they care about. She does say to choose some really good books to read aloud as a family. It sounds to me like she and her family read together several times during each day, and that they would have several books going at the same time. I couldn't ever find an exact daily schedule that she had something, but I think that that's because she wouldn't approve of making a daily schedule for another family to follow. I think her idea was you as the parent are guiding your child and possibly even introducing him to interests he hasn't even thought of yet. And so choosing a person to study like Noah Webster or Christopher Columbus, or, going back in time like Augustus Caesar, choosing one person to study and reading about their life, or maybe just a picture book that will whet their appetite for something in nature. Or maybe if you're going to be taking a trip to the Grand Canyon, finding books about the Grand Canyon before you go. And she's saying just read aloud as a family and steer the conversations naturally so that your children's interest is sparked by something that you've already discussed as a family. And maybe they will discover something new that they didn't know about before through your read aloud times. So she said to really pay attention to planning those out strategically. But again, that's something that's more natural and an enriching family activity, not necessarily a packaged curriculum. I do think that her methods are unusual. Not that I don't believe in them, just that it's very difficult to go away from something that feels like everybody else is already doing it, and it feels like it's approved, and it feels like it's safe, to go to something that doesn't have like a safety net, and you're free falling into something that you've never tried before. That's scary. But I would challenge you to read over her methods again and see if there's something that you want to try out of what she has to say, or if there's ways that you can start seeing your child's play as having redeeming qualities instead of just your kids trying to avoid their studies. Maybe there's something they're doing while they're playing that is academically helpful. I took quite a few notes. I just really appreciated her encouragement to rely on the Spirit, rely on the Holy Spirit. He is leading you. He's leading me. He's leading all of us. And he's leading us closer to him and leaning on him. I do want to show you something that we tried that year. I just went to Walmart and bought a bunch of these composition notebooks that are just plain lined papers. And we started doing something called a nature notebook. So we would take a walk. This was in the fall. We would take a walk almost every day because, remember, this was the family that I had, and our attention spans weren't very long, and it was really good to get all the kids outside at the same time, and we would just walk around our farm noticing things. And if we found something that was interesting, we would stop and talk about it, and then when we got back to the house, the kids would draw something on an index card, and either I would write for them, or they later would get in the habit of writing for themselves. But we would just paste in index cards into we called these our nature notebooks. And so when we got back from our walk, we would just all sit around the kitchen table with index cards, colored pencils. Sometimes we would get out a bird book or a flower identification book, and we would just start keeping a record. Sometimes we would actually go, this was a time that we went to Moorhead Park, which is 20 minutes away. And we actually went with a guy who taught us more about bird watching. So the writing assignment for that day was, I must have said, give me 5 rules that you should follow when you're bird watching. So he actually wrote this out in his own handwriting. And you can see the improvement. This actually is all the way to 2016. So you can tell we didn't go nature walking every single day. But just the fun things that we did together, it kind of turns into your own little scrapbook of what your kids did with you. But you could keep several notebooks going at a time for what your kids are interested in. And they can collect other things, not just their own drawings. But it kind of just reminds me of some of the scrapbooks that like my great aunts kept, with clippings from newspapers or pictures that they liked from magazines back in the 1920s and 30s. Just this idea that you can keep your own collection of ideas of things that you're interested in. So you can start an interest notebook. All right. Week 19 is our next book that we're going to be talking about. It's called You Can Teach Your Child Successfully. It's a homeschool classic. It's got some detailed plans for what you can do for the basics, reading, math, language arts. So I highly recommend that you find that book. If you use the link that's on this, I will get a little commission being an Amazon affiliate. So feel free to look for that or buy it used. There's quite a few used copies out there. So, all right. We will see you next time. Thanks.